Welcome to the Personal Development Mastery Podcast. I'm Aggie Keramidas and my mission is to inspire you to rise up, grow, stand out and take action towards the next level of your life. I interview leaders, influencers, entrepreneurs, authors, exceptional people who can and will inspire you to improve your life. Tune in for 2 episodes each week and make sure you subscribe to the podcast to get the episodes as soon as they are released. In today's show, I am delighted to speak with Elpida Frantzeskarou. Elpida, you were born in Greece, but you have lived in the Netherlands, Puerto Rico, and now in New York. You have an advanced degree in international management, and while you are still professionally employed as a market research consultant, you have a small coaching practice for people who are looking for extraordinary results. You are a Tony Robbins trainer, and you say that constantly seeking to learn and grow is for you a way of life. Elpida, it is my absolute joy to be speaking with you today, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Agis. Thank you for hosting me.
It's my pleasure. Shall we start with a bit of your journey, a bit of your extraordinary story? You say that you've embarked on a very deliberate journey of personal development 9 years ago. So I want you to paint the picture for us about what might have happened to trigger that journey and maybe any key defining moments along that way.
Sure. I guess I've always been looking for ways to learn and grow and drawn to self-help books, as they called them back in the day. And I'm talking about 2 decades ago or more. And sharing positive messages and being open to that and looking for people who lit a fire in my heart, who inspired me, both at work and outside of work. But it was really in early 2012 that I consider kind of the official start of the journey. And I had moved to New York, and I remember feeling down. That's how I would describe it. It was the second time in my life where I felt that I was living my life on really a work calendar, January to December. There was nothing that inspired me. And most days after work that often bled into my evening hours, I would just sit on the couch and watch TV. And something inside me was telling me this was not right. Something inside me was telling me that I'm too young to be where I am. And as I was flipping through channels, I landed on Oprah's channel. And she had just gone to the Tony Robbins event, Unleash the Power Within, UPW, and she had done the firewalk. And so I hang out there for a while. I'm like, yeah, Tony Robbins. And I remembered more than 10 years prior, a colleague of mine who appreciated that I was always sharing positive things in books that I had learned and read about. He told me about Tony Robbins, and I was like, yeah, forget about it. I'm okay where I am. So, you know, when they say when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. I was as ready as they come, and but not ready enough. And I'll tell you why. So I started, I was on my couch. I had my laptop next to me because you can never have enough devices around you. And I Googled Tony Robbins, and I'm like, oh, okay, he's got an event in New York coming up. And I thought, in hindsight, it's fascinating how when we really don't have a strong why, we come up with a number of excuses. So it was in New York, and I was thinking, well, it was in New Jersey. They call it the New York event. It was in New Jersey. That's a topic between New York and New Jersey for a different podcast. But I was thinking, it's close enough to drive, but a little bit far enough. And what am I going to do with the dogs? As if kennels were not an option, right? And I guess I was ready for Tony Robbins, but not a live event. So I bought a couple of his audio programs. And during my commute to see clients in New Jersey twice a week, and it was a long commute, at least an hour each way, I started listening to Tony Robbins. And his energy is contagious. And I started getting into it. And I was like, yeah, right, that makes sense. And a few months later, I was ready for my first live event because I realized that these little droplets of wisdom on a daily basis were good, but I was ready for an immersion event. And so I went to my first UPW in July of 2012. I actually traveled all the way to San Jose in California. And that's when I became a firewalker. And I almost want to say the rest is history. Right there on the spot, I signed for the next package of events. I signed for coaching so I can have my own coach. And I have grown and blossomed within that environment. And I think I found my calling.
When during that journey did you decide that you wanted to carry on and be on the leadership and now a trainer path?
Within a year, as I was working with my coach and going through the events, and I was seeing the transformation it had in me, and I was applying these things to people in my life. I want to say I was almost reminded of how rewarding that is and how it fills me up. And just to give you an idea, when I say reminded, I remember having people reporting to me in Puerto Rico, and at least a couple of them were telling me, Elpida, you'd be a great coach. And back then, that was almost 20 years ago. I really did not think much of it. And as I'm connecting the dots, because it's easier to do that with hindsight, I think it really started, like the philosophy and how you build people up. When I got my first dog in 2004, because I got a border collie and I wanted to train in agility, and the person I started training with talked to me about clicker training and positive reinforcement. And I immediately realized that the mindset of catching a dog, do the right thing and rewarding, kind of works with people. You just don't tell people you're applying dog training principles to them, but it's principles of behavior modification. That's psychology. And I started doing that with my family. I started doing that with people I had working with me in Puerto Rico, with my clients, because I had international distributors. And instead of letting people very clearly know what they did wrong, I started catching them do the right thing and reinforcing it. And a little magic started happening. So fast forward in 2012, when I go to Tony Robbins and it's all about a positive environment, I credit my first dog with getting me a little bit jump starting on the journey, but Tony Robbins is really what brought it to life and gave me a host of other tools that I can use with people.
Absolutely. And I think, if there is one name that we talk about in the podcast with my guests more than any other name, as you can imagine, is Tony Robbins. Even if the people who I talk with have nothing to do with the Tony Robbins environment, they probably have read a book or something like that. And you said earlier that phrase, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear, and that you are not completely ready for that yet. And I can relate, because I came across Tony Robbins 4 or 5 years before I actually went to his event. So I was given his it was the audio program. I'm trying to remember the personal power. So I was given that, and I thought, okay. I listened a little bit in the beginning. I thought, that's interesting. I will listen to it. And I did for years afterwards. Of course, after I listened to it, then I got really absorbed, and I booked to go to the event the following year in London. I wanted to ask you, Elpida, you said that you saw in yourself big transformations during this period. Can you give me some highlights? So when you say transformation, can you be a little bit more specific or give us a couple of examples?
Sure. As I mentioned back then, the thing that bothered me was the realization that in my early 40s, I had almost nothing to live for other than my dogs. Mm-hmm. And like I said, there was a little voice that said, there's got to be more to this in life. And even from the first Tony Robbins event, it was the dancing and the jumping up and down and that environment that is part learning, part rock concert, part anything you want it to be, that you find the answers there and you start asking some questions. But it also started planting a seed of dreaming. Mm-hmm. I started having a kind of vision of what I could dream about in my life, what I could wish for, what I could attract, what my life could be like 10 years down the line, 20 years down the line. Because, you know, us Greeks, we live a long time. And my father, God rest his soul, he lived until he was 101. So I'm convinced I could probably live well beyond that. And to be in your early 40s and truly believe that you have another 60 years of adult life in this world and absolutely no clue what you're going to do with it, it's very painful. And so I started having dreams. I started realizing that where I am today is not necessarily where I'm going to be the rest of my life. Mm-hmm. And trying to figure out, okay, how can I make it happen? What that's going to look like. Mm-hmm. Started being happier.
You can see me smiling because I can relate with many things of what you said, and I'm sure that many listeners will relate as well. This kind of shift, I'll call it like that, shift that happens to people once they reach that turning point of their 40s. It really happened to me as well, and I discovered a void, for lack of better word, inside of me, that I everything on the outside was pointing that I am successful, I should be happy and so on, but I really didn't know what to do with myself, and that led me to the journey of exploration, really. So I find that very common, and it's great that you took the steps and the journey to move forward, because as you very well know, unfortunately some people don't, and they accept that this is how life should be, that now I'm a middle-aged man or woman, and from now on it's downhill. And you know, there are these cliches, these stereotypes that people say, and once you believe that, that's exactly where you're going to go, unfortunately.
Exactly. Once you reach fill in the blank, it's all downhill from there. And having done all the work that I've done, both with Tony Robbins and other people that I've studied from and studied with, you're starting to become aware of language patterns, and you start to become aware how those phrases that were passed on to you from your parents and your grandparents, as fun as they may be, as familiar as they may be, part of the culture, they're part of this programming that you can choose to keep or move on from. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where choices come in, one of many areas where choices come in, but we all have the opportunity to make a conscious choice. Yes, you know, my parents said that, my father said that once you reach 70, 80, 90, it's all downhill from there. And something inside me says, no, my best years are ahead of me. And then you start asking different questions. Mm-hmm. Like, okay, if my best years are ahead of me, how can I make it happen? and that leads to answers.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to digress a little bit, since you mentioned the language patterns and the programming, and you also mentioned about that programming that most of us have from our childhood years. I wanted to ask, do you think that speaking a different language, I'm asking because you speak, I think it's 3 languages or 4 that you speak, do you think that using a different language changes that pattern or helps in that? I'm asking that because myself, until like 10, 11 years ago, I was speaking Greek constantly, and I had the programs in my mind, the limitations in Greek. And now the last 10, 11 years, I'm constantly using English. So I feel sometimes that some of those programs haven't necessarily transferred over, or they have lost some of their power, if you wish. What are your thoughts about that?
I think that's a very, very, very spot on observation when you're talking about languages. And I see that very often when I work with people in a language other than their own. And that happens a lot at Tony Robbins events, because we have international speakers and the events are held in English with translation. And so the phrases, because a lot of them cannot be translated word for word, and then if you try to translate and say to someone, yeah, we have a saying in Greece about that, and you try to translate and you're like, it just doesn't translate. So there are some cultural elements embedded in the phrases that, as you adopt another language for your primary language, you kind of leave behind. What I've also found is not necessarily phrases, but the emotional charge that words have. And that's part really of, beyond learning a language, understanding the charge that some words may have. That for me, when I learn a language, and it might be different from other people, I just can only speak from my experience, words are sounds put together that mean something. But what they mean is usually very concrete and almost tangible. I don't have, or initially I didn't have, all the connotations and context of what that word could mean, which is why the sensory acuity that we learn within, particularly the Tony Robbins environment, is very important. Because if you say something and people do not respond the way you expect them to, you kind of check in and say, okay, what did I just say? And I've also found that that's an interesting thought I just had. I think that as my journey in personal development has been in a language other than the one I grew up with, I think in part it might have made it easier, because I adopted phrases and words and I just accepted them as they are, as concepts. Whereas now that I am working to be able to kind of translate what I do and be able to do it in all the 3 languages that I speak. So I start reading Tony Robbins books in Greek and try to find out, how do you say that in Greek? It feels sometimes awkward and foreign, right? Another example of words being emotionally charged that I actually realized even before starting my journey with Tony was saying, I love you. Because I love you as a child growing up was not said a lot in my family. And it's not that love was not present. And we can talk about the 5 love languages and how my parents and my family express love, and how I've realized that I want love expressed towards me. But we just didn't say that very much. My father got married when he was 51. He had me when he was 52. He was significantly older. And he was a retired general of the Greek army. Not the warm and fuzzy kind, which is perfectly fine, right? Because a lot of who I am today, I attribute to him, a heck of a lot. But he was not the kind of man who would say, I love you. He was not the kind of man who would get up every morning when he saw me and says, Se agapao, kori mu. Like in Greek, it just did not happen.
Yeah.
And I realized that in English, I'm much more able to say I love you in different contexts, whether it's to a friend, whether it's to a romantic partner, than I was ever able to say that in Greek. So the cultural connotations and growing up and all the emotional charges are not present in another language until they are.
You're so right. You reminded me now what you were saying. There are two words that came to mind. One is the word God, which the Greek equivalent theos means to me something different than what the English word means. Because I had all the connotations, as a child, the church and religion, the Orthodox religion. So even though it's the same word, for me the meanings are different because I learned a new, shall we say, interpretation of what that is in English when I started speaking English. And there was another word that came to mind, the word poignant, which it took me a while to learn the word and understand what it means in English because I was translating it in English. And then I looked at, what it means in Greek, which is οδυνηρός, and I thought, wow, this is not what I had understood. So same word, but I learned it in two different languages, and it changes completely the connotation, the interpretation of what that message is. So a fascinating topic, which I know we digressed, and I didn't think of discussing that, but I believe there are some great advantages in speaking and thinking in different languages because we think in a different way. The mind has to process things in a different way, and that, I think, gives you an advantage. There's one more thing I wanted to ask about Tony Robbins, and then I wanted to discuss, you mentioned the choices earlier, which I know it's a topic you are very passionate about. So there is one other thing I wanted to ask, and that has to do with what's going on in the world today and the shifting from, in-person events to virtual. And I know that recently you attended Date with Destiny, which it was the first time that it happened virtually and not in person. So I wanted to tell me your experience, the differences, and what are your thoughts about moving on to the future? Do you think that virtual will take a big chunk, even if things, let's say, go back to how they were, which we doubt it, but even if they were, what do you think the place of the virtual will be in terms of the events?
Right. So, first of all, I think that when we have such a significant disruption in life as we knew it, we'll never go back to exactly the way things were. I think we will settle on a new norm that we all feel comfortable with, and that includes how we work, how we interact with each other, what our priorities are, and how we invest our time and money. In terms of the virtual events, I have done in the last 4 months 4 virtual events for Tony Robbins. And gosh, I don't know where to start. First, I guess I'll start big. That organization, one of the reasons why I am so honored and proud to be part of it and why I keep coming back to volunteer and serve, it's not only the positive environment, but the fact that they dream big, and pardon my language, they get shit done. Where everybody else might say, you cannot have a virtual Date with Destiny event. You cannot have 5,100 people and give them the experience that event has been designed and perfected over almost 4 decades to create. Well, guess what? We made it happen. And that takes a lot of people working very long hours to figure out how. And it's about asking the right questions, because if you start, and that applies to anything in life, if you say that's not possible, then it's not possible. And if you say, what if it were possible? Then the next question is, okay, how can we make it happen? What resources do we need? What people do we need? How do we need to adapt to have the end result? And it's a learning that I carry in life, for my own life. It's a learning that I carry in the areas of my life where I interact with people. And it's, let's be very clear and focused on what the outcome needs to be. And have a plan going in and be flexible enough to course correct along the way. And so the amount of course correction and flexibility that takes place behind the scenes, if you were a newbie in flexibility, it would freak out your nervous system. But one of the things that I've learned after being in this environment for 8-9 years is flexibility is the way of life. And I don't flinch. And we learn flexibility early on, because once Tony starts talking, we're already 2 hours outside of our agenda and the syntax and the schedule, and we start course correcting. And it goes into the virtual events when, in addition to, Tony has a conversation with someone that was not on the agenda, but he's there to serve that participant. And so 2 hours later, we need to pick up where we left off the agenda. And there is a lot of people figuring out on the fly, how can we get us back on course to wrap up the day and have everybody have their outcome. And there's also flexibility in main studio loses power and we lose the fit. What do we do? And I learned early on that as a trainer, I unmute myself and I pick up the conversation, because the outcome is give the participant certainty that nothing is unplanned for, that everything serves us. And it's a great lesson for life. What if everything that seemingly derails you is there to serve you? What if a disruption is a blessing? What if the unpredictable and the unexpected is there to serve a purpose? And so with that mindset, you cannot fail. You just course correct and move forward.
Yeah. You reminded me what the phrase that Tony says over and over again, that it's not a lack of resources, it's a lack of resourcefulness that is the problem. And what if a disruption is a blessing? What you just said now is, I think it's a way of thinking that if you start thinking like that for everything in your life takes a whole new meaning. Because it's happening, again, I will use his quote, it's happening for you, not to you. Can you tell me, in the virtual event, apart, from the obvious advantages in terms of people being at home and, not having to queue up to go to the toilet and things like that, do you think there was anything in the event that was better because it was virtual?
We were able to reach people that, for a number of reasons, would have never come to the event. Some of it might have been resources. Not everybody can afford the additional expenses that you have to incur to travel, mostly to Florida, where he has this big event, because he has a smaller one in Australia, and that's not closer for a lot of people. So we had a big international community attending this event. People, although they're not supposed to, and I'm not encouraging anybody, but people have their families in the room. And for the Leadership Academy event, people had their work teams in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's the most amazing gift you can give yourself and your family, to be able to go through this experience together in the comfort of your home and be able to have a conversation and discuss and do the exercises as the event progresses, not with a stranger, that also has its benefits, but also with your spouse. Mm-hmm. And come up with a plan together of what do you want your life to be like forward, and have buy-in. Because a lot of people, one of the spouses goes to these events and they come back changed, and they come back to a world that has not changed. And it's very challenging, which is why one of the things that we talk about a lot, especially in the last day of any event, is create a support system. Mm-hmm. Once you go back to your life, to be able to sustain the changes that you have made or the changes that you've decided to make. And I think that's a huge plus. Mm-hmm. I was talking with a young man who works for me, and his family has been in Tony events, and he has not. And he appreciates the way that I support him, which is way beyond what a manager would do. Mm-hmm. And I told him, because we were talking about him, and he's a single father, and his father, that they're connecting again. I'm like, UPW on East Coast is coming up in March. They have a deal for $397. How about you buy a ticket and you have 3 generations of men in your life go through that together? It's like, that's a great idea. Like, I know. I know it's a great idea. Do it. And I don't know if he's going to do it or not, and that's entirely up to him. But to be able to do that, because you may have older people that are not able to travel.
Yeah.
And you whether he does that or not, for me, the scenario of having 3 generations go through that together, what a blessing and what a gift. And I also remember, in some cases, the events are blended together. But in one of the events, one of the participants was telling me that they really liked the virtual event and they will attend more. Mm-hmm. But because of some anxiety that they have with traveling in big crowds, they would never have gone to a live event. Mm-hmm. So Tony's very open and vocal about how his mission is to end the suffering in this world, and suffering can take many forms. And he's able to reach people through these virtual events that he otherwise would not be able to. And I think virtual events are here to stay.
Yeah, fortunately or unfortunately, it looks like this is the case for the foreseeable future. And you know what you said about the virtual, because I crewed the UPW, the virtual, which is where I met you as well a few months back. It was, in a way, in a strange way, it was very, very close of the feeling that you would get if you are at the event, especially if you turn the volume up and have the and you participate and jump up and down. There is, if there is only one thing that I would say I really missed, and I don't think there is any substitute virtually for that, unfortunately, is the human interaction, the human contact, the hugs, these things that for me are part of the whole experience. And unfortunately that can't happen, but it's a completely new world that we're entering, or we've entered now, so we have to change like things change as well. This was the first half of the conversation with Elpida. Listen to the next episode, number 91, for the remainder of the conversation, where she speaks about conscious choices, the consequences of the choices we make, and how to find the blessing in every situation. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and rate Personal Development Mastery on Apple Podcasts, and also share this episode with someone who you think will benefit from it. If you want to become part of an exclusive community, gain access to unique content, and at the same time support this podcast, then become my patron. The link is in the show notes, or you can type bit.ly/pdmpat. If you want to know more about what I do and how I can help you, join my Facebook group Personal Development Mastery. Again, the link is in the show notes, or you can simply type bit.ly/pdmgroup. And until next time, stand out, don't fit in.